At the end of the tunnel was the city of sleep. I had seen cities in my books before. I heard of Dis, a city clouded with fog that had few people living in it. I heard of Isle City being constructed on a group of islands so that much of the city was on bridges. But none of the cities in the books prepared me for what sleep looked like. The trail connected with a bridge over a dark chasm. When I peered over the side, I nearly got vertigo. The chasm led down for what looked like an infinite distance. Beneath the bridge and beneath my feet was darkness. Darkness where I can see an inky void, a lot like the night sky, and far down below in the void I could see stars beneath my feet. Something in me saw the inky darkness below, with all the stars, and wondered what would happen if I slipped under the handrail and let myself fall into the void. Would I splash in the void? Would the darkness be like water or air? Would I fall faster and faster as the world shrank above me? Or would I gently float down, seeing the city grow from a bunch of starry lights into a single star, until I was floating among the distant stars beneath me? Or would I fall forever, never growing closer to the stars, left alone in the darkness and cold, as I gradually forgot the world where I came from, and the only thing I knew was the void, and my only remaining memories were darkness and fear. These thoughts all fluttered through my head until I became aware of the fact I was gripping the handrail so hard that my knuckles were white. I let go of the rail and let my blood flow return as I turned to see the rest of the city of sleep. Sleep was built into a massive ceiling of stone miles above us. Massive stone towers grew from the ceiling like massive stalactites. The tips of them touched walkways that connected to the buildings, and a massive network of bridges, paths, stairs, and ramps. The bridge I was on was the lowest structure in Sleep, and it ran down the middle of the city. Every 50 meters, a ramp and stairway connected the bridge to a walkway above. Much of the City of Sleep structures were built upside down, or seemingly upside down. I saw gardens that grew from the walls of most of the buildings. The fruits and vegetables dangled over the void and were being picked carefully from the windows of those who lived inside. I didn't understand how such a city could possibly function. Where does the rain come from? Does it also rain upside down in Sleep? Mesmerized by the lights above, I followed the bridge, figuring it would eventually bring me to the palace of the Prince of the Gallows. Most cities have their government near the middle. Even though the City of Sleep was built upside down didn't change that fact, did it? I continued down the street as I saw the many people of the City of Sleep. They didn't get close to me, but they all seemed distracted and in a rush. No one ever spoke to anyone nor made eye contact. They dressed in bright colors that contrasted the dark gray and black of sleep. Now my eyes had a chance to adjust. I realized the city was mostly blacks, grays, and reds. The lanterns were all red, which cast an eerie light, but the bright colors made it easy to see people in the darkness. But it made me stand out a lot more. My outfit was dull denim, which was covered in mud and dirt. So I was dull when everyone else was dressed in clean colors. Thankfully, no one noticed me, but that didn't mean I didn't stand out. I followed the road, trying not to look anyone else in the eyes. But as I continued, my stomach growled when I approached a cart full of kebabs of grilled apples. The apple slices were carefully placed on the stick that they were grilled on in an iron skillet. The heat would heat up the sugars in the apple to allow the sugar to caramelize, to make the outside of the apple sweeter. The apples would then be dipped in a mixture of caramel to give it a coating. The attendant continued to cut the apples from a basket next to them and cooked it on the iron skillet in front of them. They wore a green cloth mask and red sunglasses over their eyes, with an outfit of red and green squares that looked like it was haphazardly sewn together in a rough checkerboard pattern. Their knife was very large, and in the red light of the lantern, it made the knife look like the caramel was scarlet as blood. But my hunger was so much, I approached the apple attendant and I spoke. Hi, can I have an apple stick, please? I asked the attendant, who paused their endless task of cutting, slicing, braising, and dipping the apples to look at me. I couldn't see their eyes behind the glasses, but I felt like they were evaluating what I was asking. Before they nodded and they slammed their knife into the cutting board. Before grabbing a stick of apple slices from me, they gave it to me. I grabbed the stick and thanked the mysterious figure as I chewed into the apple slices. This story may seem odd if you aren't from Lockhart, but people don't charge for food in Lockhart. Food is plentiful. It has always been plentiful. Adansi always gave willingly to everyone who asked, and everyone else followed that example. The idea of giving something for food is anathema in Lockhart, not merely a taboo, but the idea simply would never occur to anyone. Even in the dark places like the City of Sleep, food and water is given freely. It is still rude to simply take food from someone else, though. Asking for it first was considered good manners. Most food attendants or cooks did it out of the joy of making food for others. Conversely, though, that also meant that whatever was made was what was available. If you didn't like what one attendant was serving, you either found another attendant or you made your own food. I never had a grilled apple before now, but I was hungry enough to try it. It was good, and when I finished, my hands stopped shaking and I could think clearer. I was walking for a long time, but I still hadn't found where the prince lived. I had to ask for help from someone. I took a deep breath and I approached a woman who was standing at the intersection. Even for the bright colors of sleep, she was very brightly colored. Her poofy dress reached the ground and it was all bright neon dots of pink, yellow, greens, and purples that glimmered in the red lantern light. Her face was painted in bright pink paint that dripped from her cheeks onto her dress, and in her arm was a small parasol of purple and white stripes that also glowed in the dim light as she eyed each person walking by. Unlike everyone else, she wasn't trying to avoid eye contact. She was making eye contact with each person, trying to figure out if they were who she was looking for. At the time, I didn't understand who she was or what she was looking for. She was the only one on the street who wasn't trying to avoid eye contact, especially since I left the apple attendant. I stood next to her and pulled on her dress so she turned to face me. She saw me and her mouth pulled into a smile that reminded me a lot of the wolf in the woods. "Hello, how can I help you, little one?" the woman asked, and I stood frozen for a moment. This was the first time I was actually speaking to a stranger. Sure, I spoke to Aurora and the wolf and the apple attendant, but I never had a full conversation with an adult who wasn't my parents. Father always told me to never talk to strangers, but now he is gone forever. Still, even in that moment, I felt my eyes drift down to my feet as I stared at my feet, my words unable to leave my mouth. I felt the woman's hand grab my shoulder as she spoke. "Little one, I'm not going to hurt you. Are you looking for your parents?" she asked, and I shook my head. "Okay. Do you need help?" I nodded. Okay, are you looking for someone? I nodded again. Can you tell me who it is? This time I paused before I nodded again. Whenever you are ready, you can tell me, the woman said, and I finally spoke. I am looking for the Prince of the Gallows, I told the woman, and even though my eyes were still cast on the ground, I could hear the sudden tone change in the woman's voice. I couldn't tell if it was because of me or the prince, but I could tell something changed. Oh, him? Are you sure you want to see him? She asked, and I nodded. I lost my mommy and daddy. The Prince of the Gallows is the only one who can help me, I told her, and I could see her wince from those words. I can take you to the palace, but if you're missing your parents, is there any family you can stay with? She asked me, and I shook my head. No family, no one left, I told her, keeping the exact details of Aurora a secret. I wasn't sure what I would do if she didn't believe me, or what I would do if she did believe me. I saw her face grimace a few more times before she finally nodded. Okay, I will take you to the palace, but it's probably not what you expect, she said as she held out her hand for me to hold. I took a moment before I took her hand. Her hand was soft and warm as she guided me through the streets. Can you tell me your name? She asked me, and I paused for a moment before I answered. My name is Myelin Midnight, I told her. I finally looked up to look her in the eyes, and I could see past the pink paint. She had unique eyes that sparkled, and despite the red light, her eyes were still glowing gold. But even though her eyes were the same gold as Aurora's eyes, this woman didn't feel like Aurora. Not to mention the fact Aurora wasn't an adult like this woman was. That's a beautiful name. It fits you very well. A tart name. My name is Charlotte, the woman said as she guided me through the streets. We took many turns and we passed many odd sights. We passed by ice sculptures carved into the shape of sheep and goats, but we couldn't get too close because the sculptures were surrounded by flames that wouldn't melt the ice. Flowers hung from the ceiling above, their petals always facing us as we passed by. If you listened closely, you could hear the flowers whispering to each other. I heard flowers talk before. Who hadn't? But I didn't realize that they could also whisper. Flowers always seem to be the kind to be flamboyant and beautiful. The idea of a flower trying to conceal itself with whispers felt so odd to me. However, of the entire city of sleep, it was the palace that put me off the most. I expected an upside-down castle, or the tallest tower, something that showed power, wealth, prestige, a place fit for a prince. Instead, the palace of the Prince of the Gallows was a simple, one-story tall building. No windows and no door. The doorway stood open without a door, and written in crooked letters above the door was, Prince of the Gallows. He's in there, but are you sure this is what you want? You can live with me instead, Charlotte offered me before I shook my head. Adansi said he could help me, I told her, and a shadow fell over her face. I didn't know why, but it didn't unsettle me so much as make me feel sorry for her. Well, I'll be out here when you're done, so we can talk about it, she told me as I stepped into the dark building. The building smelled bad. It smelled like pee, garbage, old food, and so many gross things. The first room was piled up with trash that barely left a single path for me to walk through. I walked through the path and I made it deeper into the building, where it was very dark. There were a few tea candles around the room, and in the center of the room was a throne. It didn't look like a throne you'd see in a storybook. It was old, torn apart, with no fabric, no gold, no jewels, nothing noble left. It definitely used to be a throne and not a chair. I could see the remnants of carvings. This was once clearly very loved and cared for, but now it was another piece of trash in a building full of trash. It sat empty, unused, and unloved. I looked around the room, but in the darkness the only thing I could see was the empty throne. "Where is the Prince of the Gallows?" I asked out loud, only to hear a raspy coughing coming from behind the throne. When the Prince of the Gallows appeared in front of me, he wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting a young boy who was the same age as Adansi, dressed up in bright purples and overflowing with gold and jewels. Someone who radiates both wealth and power. The man in front of me was almost nothing like that. He was old. He wielded his axe staff like it was a walking stick. His red, gold, and black outfit was incredibly old and worn. It looked noble once upon a time, but no longer. And it didn't feel like it was made for him. It looked stolen. He had a blue scarf of sorts that had white diamonds, and hanging around his neck, like a noose necktie, was his noose. He eyed me for a moment before he finally spoke. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his voice brittle and tired. Not the voice of someone who wants to help, not the voice of someone who even wanted to do a good job. The voice of someone who was so tired but was never going to get a chance to stop. Hello, I said, which caused the prince to pause. He didn't seem to be expecting that. "Hello, and who are you?" he asked, the cobwebs getting knocked off of his manners after finally getting a chance to use them. "My name is Mylan Midnight. I'm new in town." "Who are you?" I asked him as I reached out my hand to shake his, like I was taught by my father. He stared at my hand for a moment before he refused it, and then he introduced himself. "I am the Prince of the Gallows, vassal to Adansi, bishop to her name, and warden of the rabbits," he said with no small amount of pride as he thumped his staff to the ground, which caused the building to shake. "Those are pretty cool, but what's your name?" I asked him, and he turned to face me again. "My name? Well, don't you like all of my titles? I worked hard for all of them, and they all mean really interesting things. Being the Prince of the Gallows grants me magic. Being a vassal to Adansi means I have met the goddess. Being a bishop means I can speak for her during ceremonies. And of course, being the warden of the rabbits means all rabbits in sleep are under my protection. Aren't those all a lot better than a silly old name?" the old prince asked, desperate to protect something, but I wasn't sure of what. "Those all sound cool, and those jobs are super important, but I don't know who you are. You must have a name," I told him, and a shadow fell over his face as his eyes turned misty and his voice distanced. "Yeah, I must, but I have forgotten it after all these years. I had it when I asked for this role, and when it was granted, I everyone just called me the Prince of the Gallows. There was no need to learn my name. I was the only prince. I am the only prince. And I will always be the only prince." So why would anyone bother to learn my name when they can just address me by my title? He finished, staring into the darkness of the room. So they can be your friend, I said with a smile, and the Prince of the Gallows smiled back. But still tears fell from his eyes. I couldn't tell if he was sad or happy from what I said. Thank you, Myelin. I will see if I can remember my name, and when I know it, I will tell you. But if you may, please tell me what brought you in here today. His voice said a lot more naturally this time, like I was no longer another problem for him to tick off. I was a person who was approaching him for help. I can't go home anymore. I had to leave my mommy and daddy safe, so I can't ever go back because of Aurora's spell. So I was hoping you could make me a new family here in the City of Sleep, I told him, and his face turned not tired, but sad. Oh, little one, I am sorry Aurora separated you and your family. That bond cannot be rebuilt by any magic. As for making you a new family, I am a powerful man, maybe even the most powerful man in all of Lockhart, but even I cannot create life. The power to create life is a divine something I do not possess, but maybe there's other things I can do for you. The trash and the darkness of the room disappeared. Now it appeared that I was alone with the Prince of the Gallows in a room with black and white checkered tile. The only light was on him and myself, as he pointed his axe out into the darkness. And in the darkness another light came on. It shone on two people who were dancing together, a man and a woman. They danced together like they were two halves of a single whole. They made it through the darkness to where I was, and when they came close to me, I lifted my arms up to hug them, only for them to dance right through me. They didn't dance around me. They didn't split up and come back together. They didn't ignore me. They passed right through me like they weren't there at all. There was only a feeling of cold air where they were, as the man and the woman continued their dance, and the Prince of the Gallows finally spoke. I can create an illusion of parents to take care of you, so that way you don't have to be alone anymore. They will tell others that you aren't alone and you will always have company, he said with a proud smile. I turned to watch the dancing illusions. If they were illusions, then they weren't real. They weren't parents. It was no different from me living by myself anyways, except people would look at me and assume that I was living with someone. Do they respond to what I do? I asked the prince, who grimaced at those words. Well, no, they do what they want to do. They cannot interact with you, and they won't even be aware of the fact that you are there. So it's worse than being alone. It's being ignored by people who aren't there. And the prince shrugged. That is true, but I can try something different, the prince said as the dancers disappeared into the darkness. This time a single figure approached from the darkness. A tall and extremely thin figure that moved like a praying mantis stalking prey. The legs slid after each other, and the hands rubbed over each other, like she was eager to eat. Under her dark, wide-brimmed hat, I couldn't see her eyes, but I could see her smile. She had more teeth than could possibly fit in her mouth, all in many rows, and her smile spread from ear to ear. This is Miss Orthoptera. She has done great work for me for many millennia. She always has a way of taking care of children. I have yet to hear a single complaint from any of the children I sent her way, for her to take care of," he said, seemingly unaware of the fact that Miss Orthoptera was the creepiest person I had ever met. "Have you ever seen any of these children you sent to live with her, ever again? Or did you only see them once you sent them to live with her?" I asked him. The Prince of the Gallows tapped his chin thoughtfully. "It is through my hard work that the City of Sleep Orphanage is empty, and the doors and windows rattle in the wind. If you come with me, I promise you won't stay in the orphanage long enough to even miss your old home," Miss Orthoptera said, reaching both of her hands out to me, only for me to duck behind the Prince of the Gallows. "I don't want to go with Miss Orthoptera. I don't want to go to the orphanage," I whispered to the prince, who raised his hand, and Miss Orthoptera stopped. Her smile grew even wider as she spoke. "The orphanage remains empty," she said happily as she withdrew back into the darkness. "Don't you see how creepy she is?" I told the prince, and he shrugged. "Creepy or not, she does great work for me and also for the City of Sleep, so I won't get rid of her, nor will I execute her. But you don't need to go with her. There is yet another option for you," the Prince of the Gallows said, as from the darkness a large lump of clay appeared with the light shining on the clay. "I can shape this clay into a perfect parent for you. Once the shaping is done, the clay will move and take care of you. A perfect parent who will never tire, never get angry, never get sad, never get hungry, and will never need anything from you at all. Won't that be amazing?" the prince offered, and I stared at the clay. Already I had a question. "You mentioned that the clay will never get angry nor sad. Will it never love me? Will it never be happy for me?" I asked the Prince of the Gallows, whose face fell. He opened and closed his mouth a few times before he finally spoke. "Well, no, the golem does a job, but it doesn't possess emotions. It will do the most back-breaking job just as easily as the softest job, but it has no heart, no soul, no blood, no sweat, and no tears to pour into its work. It does a job and nothing else," the Prince of the Gallows admitted. Now looking defeated, he tapped his chin as he thought it over. "I have no other magic to create a family for you. What I can do is have you stay with Charlotte while we try to find a family for you. In 7 years' time, a new family will either be found for you, or you will create one for yourself," the Prince of the Gallows said. I wanted to refuse at first, and then I realized that was probably for the best. "I think that will work. Thank you," I said while I nodded to the Prince of the Gallows, who nodded in return. I don't think he is used to people acknowledging his hard work, let alone acknowledging him. I turned and left the building, where Charlotte stood outside. "So how did it go?" she asked me, as I explained what the Prince of the Gallows said. She was very happy to have a child live with her, and she didn't seem surprised to have me living with her. And such began my 7 years living with Charlotte. She lived in a small apartment not far from downtown. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, and I was given the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. There was already a bed, closet, drawers, and a bathroom for myself, but they were all empty. I would have to get them all with Charlotte the next day. I learned a lot from Charlotte. She taught me how to shop, how to budget, how to make money, and most importantly, She taught me how to learn. Father and mother only taught me what they needed me to know, so I wasn't a problem. Charlotte taught me to learn and to keep learning. She showed me how the sun rose and set beneath our feet, unlike everywhere else in Lockhart. She showed me how to find information from books I needed, and not just the raw information, but also how to make connections between the information. The world was a complicated web, and the more I learned, the more complicated everything became. And I loved it all. I went to school and I learned there, but I learned a lot more from my trips to the library with Charlotte. I don't know what she did for work. I knew when I was at school she was out working, and she would sometimes work late and she would shower a long time before speaking with me. And the money was plentiful enough that I wasn't lacking in anything. But even as I got closer to Charlotte, I couldn't tell her about the Rethen device. I would test it when I was alone, and I learned a lot about it, but still something inside me told me to keep it a secret. And as my 7 years came to a close, I remember sitting across from Charlotte. It was a normal day. We discussed our day plans. I mentioned I was going to see the Prince of the Gallows to let him know that I had made my family already. I was content to live the rest of my life with Charlotte. I loved her as a mother, and I thought she loved me too. She told me she would see me later that day and she would have a surprise for me. I was looking forward to the surprise, but mostly I was just glad that I figured out the riddle. The family I was meant to make was the one I had with Charlotte. I told the Prince of the Gallows about that, and he clapped his hands. That is so wonderful that you created your family. Such is what I desired for you when you first came to my palace. He still lived in filth, but I realized that was the point. He could have anything he wanted, so he was more comfortable with nothing. When I came home that night, Charlotte didn't return. That didn't worry me too much. Sometimes her work kept her out until morning, but the next morning she wasn't around either. She didn't come back that night, nor the next day. So I went to the Prince of the Gallows to ask him if he could tell me where she was. That was the only time I ever saw the old prince cry. Not merely tear up, but cry. Charlotte doesn't live anymore. Her body isn't even in the city anymore for you to bury. Her body was dumped into the sky below. You don't know how sorry I am, the Prince of the Gallows said, placing a hand on my shoulder. The world beneath me was spinning out of control. All I could think about was that Charlotte was gone. But just because she was gone didn't mean it was forever, did it? Bring her back to life, I told the Prince of the Gallows, who shook his head. I cannot bring the dead back to life, and even if I could, her body falls forever. Is that a life you want for her to live? He said, and I could feel tears flood my eyes. Bring her back. She was a good person. She doesn't deserve to fall forever. I never got my surprise. I never got to tell her she was going to be my mom. There has to be something you can do, some kind of trick or magic, maybe a test from me. Please, I will take any test. I will do anything. Just bring her back. I begged the Prince of the Gallows, who shook his head. There is nothing I nor anyone else can do to bring her back, the prince said calmly. Something in me grew so angry at those calm words. My entire world was broken. The only person who cared about me in all of Lockhart was now dead, and he had the audacity to stay calm. Something in my heart was so hurt. All I wanted to do was hurt him, just for being there. I I could order you to hang. You could be killed by a single word from me, and there is no reason for me not to. All you have to do is bring her back, or else she will hang. I warned him, only for him to sigh. Whether you threaten me or not, I do not have the power to do what you are asking me to do. You can hang me, and I will still not be able to bring Charlotte back. The only thing that you will have succeeded at is making your pain everyone else's. Is that what you want? For everyone else in the city of sleep to suffer because you're suffering? His words echoed in my mind. I had so much anger towards him. I wanted to prove him wrong. I wanted to end him just like Charlotte ended. But something inside me kept me from crossing that line. I remembered that last breakfast with Charlotte and how happy she looked, that I was going to be living with her permanently. Her last memory with me was happy. I didn't want to corrupt that last bit of happiness with her. As angry as I was, the Prince of the Gallows didn't cause my pain. Hurting him would accomplish nothing. I sighed and left his palace of trash. I lived at home for a while, but it was full of too many painful memories. Eventually, I grabbed my bag again and I made my way back to the crossroads. Everywhere in the city of sleep reminded me too much of Charlotte, and I needed another fresh start. I already lost my parents before, and losing Charlotte was even more painful than the first time. She didn't do anything wrong. She didn't try to get rid of me. She wanted me as a daughter, and she showed it. I loved her, and she loved me. And now I still loved her, and she would never love again.